is the Jaguar XE. Now, if you remember, just under 20 years ago, Jaguar gave us the quite horrific X-Type Jag, which wasn't really a Jag because it was based on a Mondeo platform, so it was a little bit rubbish and it just wasn't really keeping with the Jag theme. However, Jaguar's come back with this, the XE, which is the first time in a while that Jaguar's given us an alternative to something like the BMW 3 Series, Audi A4 or Mercedes C-Class. So in order for it to stand up in this quite tough crowd, it's going to have to be good. Step inside the Jaguar's interior and you're automatically greeted with this lovely, pleasant surrounding. I mean, it has this kind of swooping dash, which I quite like, and everything is easy to hand. And if somebody's going to be tempted to buy one of these things, it at least has to have the same sort of specification of equipment compared to its German rivals like BMW and Mercedes. And I'm delighted to say that Jaguar does. It features autonomous braking, lane departure control, and amongst many other things such as satellite navigation, which is available on all levels of trim. What isn't available on all levels of trim though is the leather seats. On this particular model, which is the R Sport, you do get leather with this kind of black and white colour combo, and they are quite lovely seats to sit in, to be fair, very comfortable. You can easily enjoy a long journey in them. They're also ventilated and it's got this sort of dual zone climate control, which makes it quite a nice pleasant area to be. If your passenger fancies a little bit of a different temperature, they can easily do that. One thing I would say about the Jag though is that in some areas you can feel some sort of deficiency in the quality, if you like, compared to its German rivals. There are some plastics that you just touch and some of the switchgear just isn't quite up to the standard that the Germans have. However, everything else, generally speaking, is pretty good. I mean, the infotainment system is very easy to use. I also like that when you start the car up, this gear stick comes out at the middle of the car, which I think is a very nice feature of the Jag. Speaking of gear sticks, you can get the car with two modes of transmission. One of them is a 6-speed manual, but that's not really the sort of thing you want in the Jag. What you want is this 8-speed auto, which I'll explain a bit later, but it's a very nice gearbox, and it also is ratioed very nicely to give good fuel economy. Final touch points, I suppose, is the steering wheel, which again, it's not too festooned with too many buttons, and it's a very nice feel and grip. So overall, not quite as good as the Germans in terms of quality, but in terms of the infotainment system and everything else, spot on from Jag, so very good. Step inside the rear of the Jag XE, and again, you're greeted with this lovely interior. There is not too bad legroom in the rear. I mean, I'm 6 foot and this is my driving position, and there is some space. You'd easily be sufficient in a long journey. However, it isn't quite as good as some of the German rivals such as the 3 Series or the Audi A4. Other points to mention, it has got this folding rear armrest with 2 spaces for some cups, and it's got some storage space as well as the 12-volt socket. Rear visibility is also okay, not the best in terms of the window space, if you like, and the cubby holes aren't massive, however easily sufficient enough for a long journey. So not the best in the class, but definitely not a bad place to be. So there are a wide variety of engines that you can get in the XE. First and foremost is the base 2-litre diesel, which produces 163 brake horsepower, all the way up to the 3-litre supercharged V6 that they actually put in the F-Type. This one, however, is the sort of middle of the range 2-litre diesel with 180 brake horsepower, which provides pretty phenomenal fuel economy. They quote it at over 60 miles to the gallon, and it can go from 0 to 60 in just over 8 seconds on to a top speed of 140. And the beauty of these engines as well is the fact that they've actually got pretty low emissions. So for this particular model, it's only 30 quid a year to tax. So this is probably the engine I'd go for. I mean, you can get petrol alternatives as well in 2-litre form, which if you're a true drag enthusiast, you probably want to go for. But for sort of bombing down the motorway, the diesel is probably the more sensible option. Driving the Jaguar XE, what's it like? Well, first impressions, pretty good. For a car of this size, it's obviously not going to set your pants alight, but it's a very nice car to drive in the sense of you feel connected. The steering feel is got a lot of feedback. The power delivery is very smooth. I mean, this particular example is the 2-litre diesel with 180 brake horsepower. And what makes this particularly good is the fact that it's mated with this 8-speed automatic gearbox, which makes the power delivery very smooth, as I shall now demonstrate. Little bit of delay being turbo, but we can forgive it for that. Other things, well, there are a couple of little issues. First and foremost, I think because of this particular trim being the R Sport, it is a little bit firm over the suspension in the road. So, but that's kind of what you expect with this sort of level of trim. I've been told that another level of trim such as the Prestige would be a lot more comfortable to drive. Any other complaints? Well, I think this armrest position is a little bit low and it's a little bit firm. They could have done with some extra padding, but other than that, I could see anybody being completely content driving many miles up and down the motorway in complete comfort. So if your job involves a lot of motorway driving, you would be very content driving this. And therefore I think the Jag XE is a very pleasant car to drive, particularly in this class when you think of the rivals such as from Audi and BMW. They can be a little bit dull sometimes. So, conclusion time. Should you consider the Jaguar XE if you're in the market for a small executive saloon? I think absolutely. I think in this colour, with these sort of wheels, I think it looks absolutely spectacular. Do not, for heaven's sake, get a basic model with terrible wheels and a terrible colour. I must admit though, in some areas it still isn't as good as the German rivals, but it's like that much off, a very tiny amount, and that's why I think you should absolutely consider it. It's a wonderful car to drive, wonderful to look at, the interior space is pretty decent. If I was in the market, would I consider one? Yeah, absolutely I would. I mean, other alternatives, if you want something a bit different, I would consider maybe the Alfa Giulia. That would probably be my first choice. Perhaps the Volvo S60, I think is a good buy, but they're a bit stingy on the old engines. So the Jag, I think, is a really, really good shout in terms of getting a car that's going to be fun to drive.